Continuing his criticism of the party and Enver, Mustafa Kemal was appointed military attaché in Sofia. While there, he became the shadow of Sofia's diplomatic circle. He was a handsome man. He always liked to be in the foreground. A party was to be held. Mustafa Kemal requested a Janissary uniform from Istanbul. This caused a great sensation in Sofia society. Although Mustafa Kemal enjoyed the social scene in Bulgaria, he was not happy with where he was in his profession. Enver had risen rapidly through the ranks to become a general and minister of war, while Mustafa Kemal was still a lieutenant colonel. As European frictions increased, Mustafa Kemal was aware of the danger of the coming World War. Britain's neglect and refusal to cooperate with the Young Turks, coupled with the introduction of German military missions into the Ottoman army, led to a rapprochement between the Sultan and the German Kaiser Wilhelm II. Mustafa Kemal, who did not take the Germans and their military capabilities seriously, insisted on neutrality, but to no avail. Mustafa Kemal had been waiting for years for the moment when he could assert himself. The First World War would give him this opportunity. Despite Mustafa Kemal's warnings, the Ottoman Empire entered the war on the side of Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire against the Entente powers of Britain, Russia, and France. After the 550-mile-long Western Front remained unchanged, all eyes turned to the Eastern Front. After effective lobbying by Winston Churchill, on February 5, 1915, the British War Committee decided to launch an attack to cross the Dardanelles and occupy Constantinople. Just 3 days before this decision, Lieutenant Colonel Mustafa Kemal had been appointed commander of the 19th Division in Gallipoli, an overlooked event that would change the fate of a war. A few kilometers from the ancient city of Troy lie the Dardanelles and the Gallipoli Peninsula. These lands had witnessed the legends of Alexander the Great, Jason, and the Argonauts. Napoleon's historic question was still relevant. Who will control Constantinople? February 19. Gathering the greatest naval power the Mediterranean had ever seen, the Allied forces began their assault on the Dardanelles. Facing intense counter-fire from Turkish positions and redoubts, the Allied forces retreated. Impatient with the lack of results from subsequent operations, Winston Churchill orders a full-scale naval attack in March 18. In 3 lines, the ships of the Allied powers sailed into the straits and shelled the Turkish shores intensely. Just as the ships were about to pass through the strait, disaster struck for the attackers. Under intense artillery fire from the Turkish bastions, the French Bouvet, the British Irresistible, and ocean ships sank after hitting the mines laid by the Nusret mine ship. By the end of the battle, 3 of the 16 main ships had been sunk and 3 others damaged to the point of being out of service for a long time. In the end, nothing had been achieved. The great and powerful British Navy had received a big slap in the face from the sick man of Europe. On March 18, after the failure to cross the Dardanelles, Admiral John de Robeck, commander of the naval forces, and General Hamilton, commander of the army, concluded that a landing operation on the European side of the strait would be necessary to cross the straits. Hamilton and his team planned what would go down in world history as the largest land invasion of the Second World War until the Normandy landings. After a month of painstaking planning, the Allied forces landed at Gallipoli on the morning of April 25, supported by intense bombardment from warships. The Anzac forces, consisting of Australian and New Zealand soldiers, landed at Cape B, now known as Anzac Cove. Mustafa Kemal was aware that the most important points for the defense of the peninsula were Kocasaman Hill and the hills around Chunuk Bair. He knew that these points should not fall into the hands of the occupation forces and acted with this knowledge. When Mustafa Kemal arrived at Kocasaman Hill, they could see very little except the British ships on the shore, so he left the men with him and went down the hill. He saw a small number of soldiers fleeing in front of the Australians who were advancing on Chunuk Bair. He told the Turkish soldiers to turn back. The soldiers replied that they had no ammunition. Mustafa Kemal bayoneted them and ordered them to lie down. This alone was enough to halt the Australian advance north of the hill. When the Anzacs stopped, Mustafa Kemal's troops, which he had left behind, reached the area. He led his men into battle, fighting on the front line himself. Mustafa Kemal knew that he had the opportunity to save the country. Either he would show the world who Mustafa Kemal was or he would die. His fanatical fighting and readiness to die led the soldiers to die with the command, "I do not order you to attack, I order you to die. Other forces and other commanders may take our place in the time that will pass until we die." After a day of fierce fighting and heroic deeds on both sides, the Anzac advance was halted and Chunuk Bair was secured. On April 25, Mustafa Kemal's success in holding these positions marked a turning point in the battle for the Chunuk Bair area. In June, Mustafa Kemal was promoted to colonel, and in August he took command of the entire Northern Front. On August 9, he led a successful attack against the British and stopped their advance from the north. On the morning of August 10, he launched the decisive attack against the Anzacs on Chunuk Bair. It was an event that would change Mustafa Kemal forever. One of the pieces of shrapnel from an exploding bomb struck him in the heart, but the shrapnel lodged in the watch in his pocket and Mustafa Kemal was not seriously wounded. After this incident at Gallipoli, the sense of immortality he had always felt was supported in the outside world. In a sense, it proved to him his immortality. It made him more confident, and more able to do what he would do later. From that day on, he became a legend among his troops as he moved freely under heavy fire. After Mustafa Kemal's attacks on August 9 and 10, the Allied forces had no strategic hill left. The glorious British Empire was defeated at Gallipoli. Winston Churchill lost his title of First Lord of the Admiralty. Mustafa Kemal's fame began to spread among his colleagues and the public. Rarely in history has a single divisional commander at 3 different times been so successful as to change the course of not only the conflict, but perhaps even the war, and perhaps the destiny of a nation. In April and August, he proved how decisively and ruthlessly he could lead his troops. The British commanders didn't have that quality. They couldn't use the troops as well as he could. He acted much more decisively at these 3 specific points in the attack, from the very beginning, and changed the course of the conflict. Because he did this 3 times, he emerged as the most important character of the war. Mustafa Kemal arrived in Gallipoli as an officer ostracized by the government and left as a national hero. Unfortunately, the victory at Gallipoli would not be enough to prevent the inevitable. The situation of the Ottoman Empire and its allies was deteriorating. The defeat was now certain. The Allies had already made plans to divide the empire. Italy, France, Britain, and Greece were waiting for a share of the spoils. After his service in Gallipoli, Mustafa Kemal was promoted to general. He fought against the Russians on the Eastern Front as an army commander and against British forces on the Southeastern Front while battling malaria in Tripolitania. He gained invaluable experience in all 4 corners of the country. At the same time, he formed more definite ideas for the future. October 30, 1918. Under the new Sultan Vahdettin, the Ottoman Empire surrendered to the British on the island of Mondros. The Entente immediately began occupying different parts of the country. Mustafa Kemal returned to Istanbul on the day the enemy fleet entered the Bosphorus. During World War I, he was the only undefeated Ottoman commander. As a result, he had a great reputation among the people. After the signing of the armistice, he increased this reputation by saying that it was unfair to the Turks and should not be signed. Looking at the enemy ships anchored in the Bosphorus, Mustafa Kemal said, "They will leave as they came." The entry of the Allied forces into Istanbul was greeted with enthusiasm by the Greek and Armenian minorities in the city. Thanks to the cooperation of the Sultan and the government, the British immediately took control of the capital. The flags of the occupation forces were flying everywhere. Within a few months, as the occupiers signed new agreements among themselves, Mustafa Kemal and his comrades in arms realized that the Allies intended not only to occupy the country but also to divide it. Realizing that the situation in Istanbul was hopeless, Mustafa Kemal began to look for other solutions for liberation. With the support of Hussein Rauf, the naval hero of the Balkan Wars, Kazım, and Ali Fuat, the commander of the remaining military forces, Kemal decided that salvation lay in Anatolia.